Let's see if anyone signed in. No one yet. I am going to wait about 3 minutes and then I'll get started. Okay, Corel is here. Okay. Corel, you're the only one so far. Hi, Darrell. Okay, it's 11:32. I will wait 2 more minutes and, well, 11:33. So I will start at 11:35, just in case there might be some internet issues in the dorm. I don't know. So far, it's just Corel and Daryl. Okay, so it's 11:35. We will get started. And welcome back. Today we're going to cover the endocrine system. We'll start coverage of the endocrine system. So we'll lecture today and Wednesday will be our last lecture for the semester. So what is the endocrine system? Let me share my screen with you. Let's see. Where there. Start screen sharing. Okay. So the endocrine system, it's a series of, it's comprised mainly of glands, mostly of glands. And the endocrine system secretes hormones, and these hormones would move through the bloodstream to target cells. And it results in slow but prolonged response. So when we started off the semester, we started off by looking at the human, what life is, right? We just determined what is life, or we not determined, but we defined constitutes life, and we looked at some of the composition of organisms that are living organisms. We looked at molecules and elements and cells, and we ended up on tissues, and eventually we started looking at various organ systems. And we looked at a host of organ systems. We looked at organ systems that govern homeostasis. For example, we have the circulatory system, the urinary system, the respiratory system. These are involved in maintaining a normal balance, an even balance in the internal environment of an organism. So we look at those homeostatic systems, and we looked at systems that are involved with movement. So your muscular system and your skeletal system. Then we last time we spoke, we started to look at systems that are involved in coordinating and regulating all the body systems, starting with the nervous system. So the nervous system is involved in regulating and coordinating all the body systems that we've talked about so far. The endocrine system does the same thing. It also regulates and coordinates all body systems. These two systems, that's the nervous and the endocrine, act in different ways, right? So the endocrine system allows for slow and prolonged responses, while the nervous system, which we studied week before last, is involved in very quick, rapid, short-lived responses. So it allows for you to make adjustments that are very rapid and short-lived. While the endocrine system, this system allows for more prolonged, slow and prolonged response to the environment. So let's look at some of the organs that are involved or make up the endocrine system. We have the hypothalamus, which is located in the brain. So we have the hypothalamus. We also have the pituitary gland, also in the brain. So hypothalamus and pituitary gland. And of the pituitary, we have both. We have an anterior and posterior pituitary. We have the thyroid. We have your adrenal glands, which sit just above the kidneys. You have your associated with the thyroid gland. You have the thymus. The pancreas is also an insulin. It's an insulin. It's an organ, but it's an insulin. It's part of the endocrine system. It secretes insulin, which is a hormone. And then you have your gonads, which are your testes and ovaries. So these are the organs of the endocrine system. And so the endocrine system, like I mentioned before, secretes hormones. The endocrine system is composed mostly of glands, but they're not all glands. For example, the pancreas is not just a gland; it's also an organ that plays a role in digestion, but it has an endocrine function. So these components of the endocrine system move through the bloodstream and affect target cells. They're target cells that they will affect. So these target cells will find on the target cells, on the surface of the target cells, you have what are called receptors. And these hormones that are secreted will act on specific target cells. So each hormone has its specific target cell, which it will interact with. So here you're seeing that hormones in the secreted into the capillaries, the bloodstream, and it can leave the bloodstream and affect target cells. If you're in this figure, you're seeing that this particular hormone will affect these two target cells, but it won't affect this third target cell because the receptor on the surface of that cell does not fit with structurally with this particular hormone. So the point here is that hormones target specific cells. In addition to the endocrine system, there's another set of glands known as the exocrine glands. So you have endocrine glands, which secrete their products into the bloodstream, but you also have exocrine glands, which secrete their products via ducts. They have passageways known as ducts, and they secrete their products into these ducts, and these ducts will carry their products to organs or to outside of the body. Okay, so, but our focus today is on the endocrine system, the glands that secrete their products directly into the bloodstream. So these products are hormones that are secreted. So what is a hormone? And a hormone is defined as a chemical signal that promotes communication between cells, body parts, and even individuals. For example, pheromones. Pheromones are chemical signals that influence the behavior of other individuals. So pheromones are interesting. Sometimes you see pheromones at work with women a lot. So if you have a group of women, for example, in the dorm, or a group of women living together in close proximity, or living in close proximity to each other, you will find, for example, their menstrual cycle will start being very similar. And one explanation for that could be these pheromones that allow for it allows for coordination of the menstrual cycle of several women that are in close proximity or living in close proximity to each other. So that's one type of hormone. You also have prostaglandins. Prostaglandins, these are local hormones that affect neighboring cells. And so they don't move through the bloodstream. So the endocrine gland will secrete prostaglandins, and it will only affect the cells that are next to it. So they don't move through the bloodstream. You also have two other types of hormones: peptide hormones and steroid hormones. And peptide hormones, they will bind to receptors on the surface of the cell membrane and will activate molecular cascades or molecular reactions within the cell. So peptide hormones stay on the outside of the cell. They interact with the outside of the cell, receptors on the surface of the cell, but they cause an effect on that cell internally, okay, by stimulating metabolic pathways. While steroid hormones, on the other hand, they can actually cross the cell membrane, get inside the cell, get inside the nucleus of that cell, and affect gene activity. So you're seeing here how these peptide hormones work. So here's a peptide hormone binding to a receptor in the cell membrane. You can see that's a lipid bilayer. Okay, so it binds to the receptor in the cell membrane, and it affects a host of chemical reactions on the inside. While steroid hormones can actually cross the membrane, get into the cell, get into the nucleus of the cell, and affect gene expression. Okay, so let me see if anyone else joined us so far. Okay, we do have some others. Okay, so Katie, you're saying the poll wasn't working. Okay, sorry about that. Okay, I guess it's working now. It's working now because I can see your text. Okay, all right, so let's move on. Okay, so let's see. What are these glands that make the system? These are the major glands. There are 11 of them. And we will try to get through 11 of them. I don't know how far we'll get. We'll see how far we can get. Okay, so we'll start with the hypothalamus. And this is found located in the brain. So the hypothalamus is located in the brain. So this is an example of, systems working together. So we know the brain is part of the nervous system. But in that nervous system, you have this gland, the hypothalamus, located in the brain, which is part of the endocrine system. So the hypothalamus has both an endocrine side, and it also has a side that is made up mainly of nervous tissue, but we're not going to get into that in this class. But let's see what the hypothalamus does. It says that the hypothalamus regulates the internal environment through the autonomic nervous system. So the hypothalamus works in conjunction with the nervous system, okay? It helps to control heartbeat, it helps to control body temperature, helps to control water balance, okay? And it controls the glandular secretions of the, it controls glandular secretions. For example, ADH, that's anti-diuretic hormone, which affects the kidneys. It controls oxytocin, which acts on the uterus. It also affects another secretion known as the HRH, stands for hypothalamic releasing hormone, and the hypothalamic inhibiting hormone. These are secreted, these hypothalamic releasing hormone and hypothalamic inhibiting hormone controls another gland known as the anterior pituitary gland. Okay, let me go back over this slide. So you have the hypothalamus found in the brain, okay, located in the brain. So it works through the autonomic nervous system to control heartbeat, body temperature, water balance. The hypothalamus also secretes ADH, known as anti-diuretic hormone, and anti-diuretic hormone affects the posterior pituitary, which then affects the kidneys, which then affects the kidneys and affects the kidneys. The oxytocin, another hormone produced by the hypothalamus, affects the uterus. HRH, produced by the hypothalamus, affects the anterior pituitary. HIH, also produced by the hypothalamus, affects the anterior pituitary. So you could think of the hypothalamus as this governing gland, the big gland that affects other glands. Okay, so the hypothalamus doesn't necessarily affect one particular organ directly, but it can affect one gland, and then that gland affects another gland. So let's look at a figure here showing you how wide the effect of the hypothalamus is. Okay, so here is our hypothalamus. The hypothalamus, this is in the brain there. The hypothalamus secretes products that would affect both the posterior pituitary and the anterior pituitary. So the products of the from the hypothalamus that goes into the the posterior pituitary gland affects the kidneys. So here, that's the ADH affecting the kidneys. It affects the uterus by producing oxytocin, which causes uterine contraction. And oxytocin also affects your mammary glands, which is involved in milk letdown after. Okay, so this is again starting in the hypothalamus. We have ADH and oxytocin, which affects the posterior pituitary, which then affects the kidneys, the uterus, and mammary glands. Then we also have secretions from the hypothalamus that move to the anterior pituitary, and these affect the thyroid gland. These affect the thyroid gland, the adrenal cortex. It affects your mammary glands too, your bones, and also your ovaries. So again, secretions from the hypothalamus some of the secretions from the hypothalamus can move into the anterior pituitary and affect the mammary gland, okay, by producing prolactin. Prolactin affects the mammary gland. Growth hormones, which affect bones and tissues. You have hormones known as FSH and LH. These are luteinizing hormone and follicle stimulating hormones, which affect the ovaries and testes. You have ACTH, which is a adrenocorticotropic hormone, which affects the adrenal gland. And then you have thyroid stimulating hormone, which affects the thyroid. So you can see the hypothalamus is like the head honcho, okay? It affects the posterior pituitary, which affects other organs, and then it also affects the anterior pituitary, which affects other glands and organs and body structures in the body. Okay, I think I have a nice diagram that sort of summarizes that. So let's look at this here. Okay, so here's a summary of that. The hypothalamus produces ADH, antidiuretic hormone, and oxytocin, and these are secreted into the posterior pituitary, and then they affect the kidneys, the uterus, and milk let down from the breast. You also have the hypothalamus producing hypothalamic releasing hormone and hypothalamic inhibiting hormone, which affects the anterior pituitary. The anterior pituitary produces these hormones, the TSH, the ACTH, FSH, and LH, prolactin, MSH, and growth hormones, and these affect other glands and organs. Okay, so let's see, any questions there? Okay, I see a question. The final is next Tuesday. Check your syllabus. The final is on next Tuesday, 10 to 12. So check your syllabus. All right. So now let's look at some of the products of, so that's the hypothalamus. So that's the hypothalamus, okay? Now let's look at the pituitary. So we have both the posterior and the anterior pituitary. And we're going to look at some of the products. We'll start by looking at growth hormones. Growth hormone, which is secreted by the anterior pituitary, and its effect on bones and tissues, okay? So let's see, the growth hormone produced by the anterior pituitary affects bone growth and affects bone growth and other skeletal tissues. So for example, showing you here in this what happens if, let me see here, when too little growth hormone is produced, it results in what is known as pituitary dwarfism. So too little growth hormone is produced during childhood. It results in the small stature of the individual, known as pituitary dwarfism. Okay, so that's too little growth hormone being produced. What happens when you have growth hormone is produced in improper amounts during childhood? You can have what we mentioned, the pituitary dwarfism, or you can have what is known as giantism here. That's a giant there. This is when too much growth hormone is produced during childhood. Okay. So too little results in pituitary dwarfism, and too much during childhood again results in giantism. Giantism. So you're seeing here a giant and a pituitary dwarf. Okay. What about if too much is produced during adulthood? So the effects vary. So if too much growth hormones is produced during adulthood, then it causes a condition known as acromegaly. Acromegaly, and it results in an individual having larger than normal feet and hands. So you see this woman here, she looks normal up until about age 33. You can see her hands here. You see her hands looking pretty abnormal. Look at her face. There's additional growth of the bony structure above her eyes, and hands and feet also will continue to grow. Okay, so that's too much growth hormones during adulthood. Right. Okay, so that's the pituitary. So we looked at the hypothalamus, the pituitary. We looked at the one hormone, the growth hormone. Then let me go back to this slide here. Okay. Remember, you have your posterior and anterior pituitary, and one of the hormones produced by the anterior pituitary is the growth hormones, and we see how it can affect the bone structure and how imbalance of that can cause different configurations in the individual. Here's another hormone, TSH, thyroid stimulating hormone. So this thyroid stimulating hormone stimulates the thyroid gland. So let's see what happens. What are the hormones produced by this gland? Okay, so the thyroid gland, it says it's a large gland located below the larynx, and it produces thyroid hormone and calcitonin. Thyroid hormone regulates metabolism. Calcitonin helps to lower calcium levels. And it does so by stimulating calcium deposits to the bone. So it will take calcium out of the blood and take that calcium and put it into the bone. Okay, so as you consume calcium, if excess of it can eventually end up in your bones, which is a good thing. Okay. It says here iodine is needed in the diet to allow the thyroid gland to produce hormones. So we need iodine in our diet, and you know that we have salt. There's some salt that is supplemented with iodine because it's not a substance that you can find very readily. So one of the ways of making sure that the population has iodine is to make iodized salt, and that helps helps the thyroid to produce its hormones. Okay. So this is showing you here the thyroid, where it's located. It's below the larynx. Okay. Okay. So let's look at some abnormalities that are associated with the thyroid. Let's say, the thyroid isn't working and producing the what it needs to produce. Okay. So some thyroid abnormalities. We have what is known as simple goiter. That's what this slide is showing, simple goiter, where the thyroid enlarges due to lack of iodine in the diet. So if you don't have enough iodine in the diet, what happens is that the body starts, the thyroid will start overworking to produce its hormones because there isn't enough iodine. The brain detects that there's not enough iodine in the body. The brain will start stimulating the thyroid to try to produce thyroid hormones because, again, low iodine will result in low thyroid hormones. And so to counteract the low thyroid hormones, the brain will force the thyroid gland to work hard in producing thyroid hormones. And that causes an overstimulation of the thyroid gland and causes the thyroid gland to enlarge. And that's known as simple goiter. So simple goiter results from constant stimulation of the thyroid gland by the anterior pituitary because the anterior pituitary is detecting that there isn't enough thyroid hormones present. So having a diet that is adequate with iodine is crucial in preventing this simple goiter. Then you have what is known as hypothyroidism. And that leads to what is known as congenital hypothyroidism. So not enough, again, low levels of thyroid hormones being produced. And this leads to a person that's quite very short and stocky. Let's see here. Here's an example of that. Hypothyroidism, where the individual it leads to a form of dwarfism. So here, the individual is pretty short and stocky, but look at the extremities of this individual. The length of the arm is pretty normal. The size of the feet, pretty normal, but the torso is very short. Okay, so again, that's known as congenital hypothyroidism, caused by low levels of thyroid hormone. Usually, these individuals, congenital hypothyroid, people suffering from congenital hypothyroidism, tend to be mentally retarded. Then there's another type of hypothyroidism which occurs in adults, leading to a condition known as myxedema. In myxedema, these individuals have, let's see here, that puffy eye. Oh, it affects the eye, I should say. You can see one of the effects is on the eye. You can see that protruding eye there. Let me see if I have another figure of that. Yeah. It can lead to what is known as Graves' disease. And you can see here, one of the signs of that is the bulging of the eyeball. You can see that here in these two individuals, bulging of the eyeball and the fingers forming what are known as clubs. So you have this club formation of the fingers, and you can see that here in both these individuals. So hypothyroidism can lead to congenital hypothyroidism, which is just short, stocky individual that could also be mentally retarded, and then Graves' disease, okay, in adults, if you have this occurring in adults. Okay, let me see if there are any questions so far. No questions. Right. Let's move on. Associated with the thyroid gland are glands known as the parathyroid glands. Let's see if I can get to that. I don't have a good figure of it, but the parathyroid gland is actually closely associated with the thyroid gland. So this is a thyroid gland. Inside of the thyroid gland are these little 4 spots, and these 4 spots are actually the parathyroid. Let me see if I have a better figure of the parathyroid here. Yeah, so here, okay, so here's your thyroid gland, and here are the parathyroid glands. There's 1, 2, 3, 4 spots. Those are the parathyroid glands. So what is the function of the parathyroid? Let's see. So it says the parathyroid, small glands embedded in the thyroid gland, they produce parathyroid hormone, which causes the calcium levels to increase, blood calcium levels to increase by promoting osteoclast activity. So you can see this works opposite of the hormone that secretes calcium into the blood. So let's go back to that hormone here. Where is it? Right there. Calcitonin. Calcitonin lowers blood calcium. So it takes calcium out of the blood and allows the calcium to be deposited in the blood, while that's calcitonin. While the other hormone, let's get to that. Here. The parathyroid hormone, okay, takes calcium from the bones by promoting osteoclast activity. We know osteoclast is involved in bone breakdown, so it will pull the calcium from the bone and deposit it into the blood. So parathyroid hormone and calcitonin are antagonistic to each other. Okay, they're antagonistic to each other. Once in the blood, the calcium, it could then be reabsorbed by the kidneys. And so this shows you, this figure is showing you regulation of blood calcium. So it's showing you here when blood calcium is high, when blood calcium level is high, the thyroid hormone will stimulate calcitonin, which will remove the calcium from the blood and deposit it into the bones. But when blood calcium is low, the parathyroid hormones will secrete the parathyroid hormones will extract cause osteoclast breakdown, and that will cause osteoclast to break down the bone, and that will cause an increase of calcium in the blood, which then is absorbed by the kidneys, and that causes the blood calcium levels to go back up, right? All right, so that's it for the parathyroid hormone. The 6th hormone is our adrenal glands. Our adrenal glands, and these are found sitting on top of your kidneys. So let's see if I can find a figure of that. Yeah, right here. So here are your kidneys, and that yellow structure on top of the kidneys, that is your adrenal. These are your adrenal glands. So they found sitting right on top of the kidneys. Okay. Let me get to my slide here. Okay. So each adrenal gland has two parts. You have what is known as the adrenal medulla or medulla, which is the internal part of it. And this adrenal medulla controls the nervous system. Okay, so here's an example again of the endocrine and nervous system working together. Okay, so the adrenal medulla controls the it's controlled by the nervous system. Okay, the adrenal medulla is controlled by the nervous system. So that's the inner portion of the adrenal glands. The adrenal cortex, found on the outside, it's outside of the medulla. Portions of it are controlled by the ACTH. ACTH stands for adrenocorticotropic hormone, and which is produced from the anterior pituitary. Okay, so hormones produced from the anterior pituitary, and if you recall, the anterior pituitary is controlled by the hypothalamus. So, okay, so the hypothalamus controls the anterior pituitary. The anterior pituitary secretes adrenal corticotropic hormone, which then affects the cortex of the adrenal. Okay, so what is produced by the adrenal medulla? It says the adrenal medulla is controlled by the nervous system. Let's see the hormones produced by the medulla. You have epinephrine and norepinephrine. Epinephrine, another word for that is adrenaline. So adrenaline and noradrenaline are produced from the medulla. And this allows for our flight and fight response. It allows us to danger. Okay, so that's the adrenal medulla. The cortex, the adrenal cortex, produces different hormones. It produces mineralocorticoids and glucocorticoids. Mineralocorticoids are involved in regulating our water salt balance, while our glucocorticoids regulate our protein or protein, fat, carbohydrate metabolism. Okay, so we have, again, adrenal cortex producing two types of hormones: mineralocorticoids, which are involved in the regulating our water salt balance, and glucocorticoids, which are involved in our metabolism and also our body's inflammatory response. Remember, cortisol. Cortisol is an example of a glucocorticoid, and that affects our inflammatory response. So again, the adrenal gland has two sections. We have the adrenal medulla, which is controlled by the nervous system via the hormones, via the epinephrine or the adrenaline and noradrenaline, and the adrenal cortex, which produces your mineralocorticoids, which are involved in water salt balance, so it's affecting the kidneys, and glucocorticoids, which plays a role in metabolism and the inflammatory response. And so this is a really nice slide here that summarizes the function of the adrenal glands. And in your text, let's see if there's a figure that shows that. Yeah, figure 16.13 summarizes the adrenal glands. So pay attention to that. I think it will help. In addition to reading, this figure really summarizes very nicely the role of the adrenal glands. So you can see here the adrenal medulla. Okay, that's the medulla, and this is the outer part, the cortex. So the medulla produces epinephrine and norepinephrine, which allows for quick responses. And then we have our cortex, where your mineralocorticoids and glucocorticoids are produced. All right, so let's see what happens if there's a malfunction of the adrenal glands. Okay, first one, hyposecretion of the glucocorticoids. by the adrenal cortex. So if you don't have enough of the glucocorticoids being produced, it can lead to a disease known as Addison's disease. Addison's disease. So if you don't have enough glucocorticoids, then you know you will have a decrease in metabolism. Okay, and one of the effects of that is Addison's disease. Do you know that President Kennedy had Addison's disease? Okay. Okay, I see a question here. What is noradrenaline? Okay, it's called noradrenaline, not no. Noradrenaline, that's N-O-R adrenaline. Noradrenaline is it's the antagonist for adrenaline. So adrenaline causes us to respond quickly to danger, right? So if we're in a dangerous situation, then we have adrenaline being produced, and that allows for a flight or fight response. It allows us to run away or to fight or defend ourselves. Noradrenaline, what that does, it comes in and suppresses the adrenaline so we get calm again. So we don't stay in that hyperactive, tense state. Without noradrenaline, we'll always be terrified and scared and running and not being able to be calm. So that's a good question, Gadale. Okay, so noradrenaline acts in opposition to adrenaline. And again, it's spelled N-O-R-A. It's one word, noradrenaline, not no adrenaline. It's noradrenaline. All right? Okay, good question. Okay, so Addison's disease, like I mentioned, is caused by hyposecretion of glucocorticoids by the adrenal cortex, and one of the symptoms of that is this bronzing of the skin. Let me get to my slide. It causes bronzing of the skin. So here we have two Caucasian individuals. This is someone with normal adrenal function. And you can see the skin color here. Here is someone with that bronzing occurring, and you can see that the darker complexion of that individual. Also, the face of this individual shows example of that. Here's another look at Addison's disease. Okay, you can see that darker complexion, and these are all Caucasian individuals, and you can see just from these figures, you can see that bronzing occurring. Okay, so that's caused by hyposecretion. But what happens if there's too much hypersecretion? Hypersecretion of these glucocorticoids is characterized by weight gain in the trunk of the body, but not the arms and legs. So this is someone who is suffering from hypersecretion, and that's called Cushing syndrome. Cushing syndrome. So here, this is an individual with Cushing syndrome before treatment. After treatment, you can see that decrease in the, well, the individual looks pretty normal, doesn't look overweight. The weight gain is controlled in after treatment. Okay, so this is before and after treatment. Okay, any questions? Okay, let me see. Okay, I don't see any questions yet. All right, so let's go back to our list of organs in the endocrine system. Let's see how far we've gotten. Okay, so far we've looked at the hypothalamus, the posterior and anterior pituitary, the thyroid gland, the parathyroid, the adrenal gland, and now we have our pancreas, testes, ovaries, thymus, and pineal gland. So let's go to the pancreas. We know we've seen the pancreas before, but here's a question for you. What is the role of the pancreas in the digestive system? What is the role of the pancreas in the digestive system? And I will wait for your answer. Yes, very good, Katie. Produce and secrete digestive juices, which are the enzymes that are involved in breakdown of your food. Okay, so the pancreas plays a role in digestion. The pancreas also plays a role in the endocrine system. So let's see what it does. All right, so here's the pancreas. We know it's a fish-shaped organ found behind the stomach, and it has an exocrine function. The exocrine function is what it does in the digestive tract, in the digestive system. It produces and secretes digestive juices, as Katie says, and as the book says, and as is known, I should say. Then you have the endocrine system, the endocrine function, I should say, of the pancreas. And that function is to produce and secrete hormones. There are two types of hormones produced by the pancreas. You have insulin, which helps to lower blood glucose levels, and glucagon, which increases blood glucose levels. So after you've had a meal, and most meals have carbohydrates or carbohydrates, which are then broken down to glucose, that will cause an increase of blood glucose levels. After you've had a meal, that increase of glucose levels is taken care of by insulin, which is secreted by the pancreas. The insulin will come and remove that glucose from the blood and store the glucose in your muscle and your liver. Glucagon, however, detects low blood glucose levels, and it will take the glucose from your liver and muscle, which is in the form of glycogen. So when you take the glucose from the blood and put it into the muscle and liver, the glucose forms what is known as glycogen. So glycogen is a storage form of glucose. Glucagon, when blood glucose levels are low, glucagon will then extract the glycogen from the liver and muscles, and will cause it to break down that glucagon, and break down the glucagon into break down the glycogen into glucose. I'm sorry, I got a phone call that was distracting me. Okay, so glucagon will detect low blood glucose levels. So it's secreted only when blood glucose levels are low, and it will stimulate the breakdown of glycogen in the liver. And that breakdown of glycogen will cause glucose to be secreted. So insulin and glucagon are antagonistic to each other, okay? And that's what this slide is summarizing, the how blood glucose levels are regulated. So when blood glucose levels are high, the pancreas secretes insulin, and insulin will cause the glucose in the blood to be packaged into glycogen, and the glycogen is stored in the liver and in your muscles, and even in some fat cells. And then when blood glucose levels are low, the pancreas will secrete glucagon, and glucagon will extract the glycogen, break down glycogen into glucose, and take the blood glucose level back to where it needs to be. Okay. So we will end there for today. It's now 12:20. And I will see you on Wednesday for our last lecture. We shouldn't have a full lecture on Wednesday because we've covered most of the glands so far. So I will see you on Wednesday. Okay, have a good day.